Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Aronian had just played rook c8 and Carlsen continued with rook a1. Instead of rook c8, so just rook c8, it's important to note that Carlsen was unconcerned with knight g5. We can have a quick look. If knight hg5, for example, is queen g3 and white retains the edge. If bishop d6 now, e5, bishop e7, and knight c4, and white continues to slowly improve and advance his pieces in the center. So it's all very good play. So rook a d1 is what Carlsen did play, and he gets his final piece into the fray, and with this move further increases his positional control. And this d pawn, both the hanging pawns, is the weaker of the two, given the pressure from the queen and the knight, and the d file is more open than the e file, so it makes sense to plan a rook here. There'll be tactics later with the d5 pushes potentially. All of these complications Aronian has to factor in constantly when choosing his moves, which, as I said before, makes it very difficult, and that's one of the advantages in having a mobile and strong pawn center. And on top of that, he's keeping Aronian restrained, which is no small feat. He's a renowned attacker and a dynamic player, and it's notable that Carlsen is preventing him from liberating his game, despite how tempting it may be, with either the c5 or the f5 pushes here. Aronian played bishop h4, but let's have a look and see what happens if he tries to liberate and to create counterplay instead. For example, if instead c5, white's edge will double to about a pawn after knight d5, knight eg5. If instead knight c7, now bishop h6 presents black serious problems. The rook is attacked, and f7 is obviously weak due to the queen and the rook. For example, if knight g5, queen f2, and black is losing at least the exchange. If he moves the rook, then h4 comes next, attacking the knight and taking away the only defender of f7. So that's just a disaster. So knight eg5 would be better. But now queen g3, again with the simple threat of h4, and this time the problem is that the knight is going to have no squares to move to. They're all either occupied by black pieces or covered by white pawns. And black's best way of dealing with this is to play c4 with the intention of answering h4 with c3. So the correct answer is rook c1. If he plays instead h4, black can play c3, and it's not as bad for him, although white still has a comfortable edge. So rook c1 would be correct instead of the immediate h4. And now black is struggling to find moves. There's no way to save his knight anyway, so he may as well play something like a4 and counterplay with the queenside majority. But now of course comes h4, and we see one of the many strengths in the central pawn majority. Here it denies the knight e6, most importantly, and black has no choice but to sacrifice. So knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes h4, queen d6, and black has two pawns for the piece and some compensation here, but not enough. And it won't be easy to convert, but with correct play it should definitely be a win for white. So black cannot equalize with the c5 push. Let's have a look at f5 instead at this stage. So if instead f5, then white plays simply queen g3, taking aim at the freshly weakened g6 pawn, and again white has a good edge at close to a pawn. The best move for black to defend is bishop g5, and it also breaks the pin that's going to exist on this g pawn after exchanges on f5. So after e takes f5, rook takes f5, the best move, if instead bishop takes e3 to break the coming pin on the bishop after the g-pawn moves to f5, white simply plays queen takes e3, which attacks the knight, the loose knight, and black's in all kinds of trouble. It's a winning position already after, for example, knight g7, f takes g6, white is 2 pawns up, and the attack rages on. So rook takes f5 is the best move. So rook takes f5, g takes f5, and now knight f3, and again black is in trouble. You know, h4 is threatened, and there's not that much that black can do about it. The best move he can do to break the pin, you know, is just king h8, but now comes knight e5. I mean, the bishop's adequately defended with these pieces, but knight e5 is a problem. Knight f7 check is threatened. So best play continues, queen f6, bishop takes g5, excuse me, knight h takes g5, and now queen h4, creating a pin on the knight here, and threatening to take on h5 with check. And you know, if for example queen h8, breaking the pin, defending the h pawn, now comes knight g3, forking these 2 pawns, and white is going into a superior endgame in all of these variations. And it's very instructive that Carlsen is able to restrain his opponents in such a way as that any liberating move will result in a far better position for him. Almost all club players would have tried such a liberation long before and suffered the consequences. Aronian understands what is happening too, of course, and is thus reluctant to make such a move, but if he does not create some kind of play for himself, he will be slowly squeezed to death with such play from Carlsen, whose style in this manner is hugely reminiscent of Karpov. Okay, so back to the game continuation. Aronian has just played bishop h4, and Carlsen was happy enough simply to kick the bishop before taking any further action. And it's hard to know for sure what Aronian had in mind with this move bishop h4 anyway. It was perhaps to allow the f5 push, you know, in combination with denying queen g3, which is impossible of course if the bishop is on h4 or if it's been kicked by this pawn on g3. And you know, Aronian must have considered this move in response, and it does at least weaken the king's side a little, although black is still in no position to exploit that. And we've seen that black cannot yet liberate with a pawn push, so such a move is a valid alternative. And Aronian retreated the bishop to f6, intensifying the pressure on d4, and Carlsen was more than happy to play knight c4, which is, you know, defending the d pawn with the rook, and gets the knight to a good outpost square in the process, and it's also applying pressure to the a5 pawn from c4, which the black queen is tied to defending for now. And for the second time it seems that Carlsen is a move ahead of Aronian in the play. For the white pieces everything is flowing smoothly and working together well. And this move, knight c4, it doesn't create any immediate threats, but as before it's a further increasing of white's positional advantage, which is very nice play again from Carlsen. Aronian continued with bishop g7, which is a safe move as he's played g6 and h5, weakening his dark kingside squares, and now white is unable to play bishop h6 with tempo, and black can also push f5 now if he chooses, and hope at last for some counterplay, as there's no queen g3 because this g3 push has been provoked. Carlsen at this stage played the quiet b3, which protects his only loose piece before taking further action, and Fritz felt that this allowed black to equalize if he is willing to take the risk and play an immediate f5. and was of the opinion that the move instead for Carlsen was queen g2, with either d5 or knight f4 coming next, for more of an edge. You know, this is pretty much the only moment in the game where Carlsen's play didn't agree with the opinion of Fritz. But that's not to say that Carlsen is playing inferior moves, because his understanding is undoubtedly superior to Fritz's understanding. In any case, Aronian failed to capitalize on this, you know, apparent inaccuracy from Carlsen with b3, and you know, you can't really blame him for not taking such a risk against Carlsen. And you know, the move was f5 to try and equalize, and instead of that he played queen e7, which moves the queen out of the line of fire of the rook and offers the a pawn, but it's not a sacrifice, because black can answer knight g5 and win the e4 pawn. But this allows white to do the same, i.e. move his queen out of the line of fire on the f file too, and retain a rock solid positional advantage. And black had to play instead f5, where best play continues e5, knight hg5, bishop takes g5, you know, trading off a restricted bishop given the central pawns for an active knight, which is generally a good idea. And now would come knight takes g5, queen g2, knight e4, and knight f4, which is threatening both knight takes g6 and knight e6, winning the exchange. So queen e8 is a logical move, and now rook f e1 is good for white to maintain his edge. Also possible is knight takes a5, but this is a hapless pawn grab where black will have good compensation and white can do better anyway. Simply rook f e1, and the domination and initiative continues for white. The knights in particular are excellently posted, and all the play in the resulting positions belongs to white. If you like, he can simplify with rook takes e4 and knight d6 and win the pawn on e4. And there's just nothing for black here. White is slowly but surely advancing to victory. Okay, so we'll go back to the game continuation with queen e7, and Carlsen played queen g2, as I mentioned, moving his queen out of the line of fire, and this lessens the power of the f5 push from black, which is now unadvisable positionally. And you know, Carlsen routinely plays chess with engine-like accuracy, and he's doing exactly that in this game. It's important to note that white can play, instead of queen g2, knight takes a5, but you know, it's an apparent pawn sacrifice by black, but as I said, it's not in fact that, because after knight eg5 the e pawn is dropping and white's center is getting loose, and these kingside weakening moves could become a problem if white isn't careful. Even if bishop takes g5, just knight takes g5, and you know, this is another of the reasons why it's a good idea to get the queen off the f3 square and before taking further action, which is what Carlsen has just done with queen g2. And Aronian continued with knight c7, which, you know, is now genuinely sacrificing his a pawn, because there's going to be no knight g5 now, the tempo on the queen on f3 picking up the e4 pawn. And he was perhaps getting impatient for activity, and as before, both c5 and f5 were inadvisable. You know, f5 is obviously bad. The knight is on e6, but why not c5? And we can have a look. For example, if c5, now white can play d5, and this poses black some serious problems. d8 is the best move for the knight, and there are some nice traps here for inferior moves. For example, if knight eg5 taking aim at e4, now comes a great move. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. There's actually two good moves, but one is significantly better than the other, so if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Excuse me. Okay, the move is e5, which takes the e4 square away from the knight, removes the pressure on the e pawn, and threatens once more h4, as we saw in the previous line, where the knight is got nowhere good to go. You know, but ostensibly it's a pawn sacrifice because there's bishop takes e5 here, and that's best play if black, you know, is going to let white have this continuation by playing knight g5, and now comes simply h4, and white wins a piece. So that's the best continuation. The other move was d6, which is also tactically very strong. So after knight d8, anyway, the correct move would come e5, and you know, white is close to winning already with an advantage of close to 2 pawns. Knight f4 and e6 are coming next. She's gonna totally crush black, and he cannot play bishop takes e5 here thanks to d6, and the queen is tied to defending the bishop from the knight, so queen e6, but now comes a bishop h6, and if rook e8, d7 is gonna win a rook. You know, black can't blockade the pawn here. He's gonna go the exchange down, and white can simplify quickly. The best chance is knight c6, but now simply knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes f8, rook takes f8, knight f4, queen d7, queen d5, and black falls apart. So once again we see that deep within Carlsen's play there's not only superb positional maneuvering, but very powerful and subtle prophylaxis. Okay, so back to the game continuation. Aronian has just played knight c7. So the positional pressure results in the winning of material. Carlsen sees no danger in taking the a5 pawn now that knight c7 has been played, because knight takes a5 is going to come with tempo, because it's going to attack c6, which will attack the queen. And you know, Carlsen times this capture perfectly, and now at this moment there's no compensation for black for his lost material after knight takes a5. Okay, that's the end of part 2.